My ex-wife and brother stole my business idea. Now they're asking for a loan to save their failing company. Hey everyone, I've got a story to share with you today, and trust me, it's one of those stories that'll make you question everything you thought you knew about family, loyalty, and betrayal. You see, I used to think that blood was thicker than water, that family would always have your back, no matter what. But that's not always the case. In fact, in my case, it was the exact opposite. I had this business idea, a big one, something that I had been working on for months, pouring my heart, soul, and every last bit of energy into. I'd done the research, made the plans, and had even started building things up from scratch. It was my dream, and I was determined to see it through. But there was one problem. My brother, my flesh and blood, and my ex-wife, the person I once trusted more than anyone, somehow got wind of my idea. I don't know exactly when or how it happened, but suddenly things started to feel off. At first, it wasn't anything major. Just little things. Casual mentions of, hey, that idea sounds good, or I was thinking about doing something like that. But soon enough, my ex-wife and brother, who used to support me, who I thought I could rely on, decided to take it a step further. They didn't just admire the idea, they stole it. They took everything I had worked for, everything I had shared with them, and used it to launch their own company. They cut me out completely, as if I had never existed in the picture. Fast forward to today. Now, they're in trouble. Their company, which was built on my hard work and my original idea, is failing, big time. The dream I had, the one they took from me, is crumbling right in front of their eyes. And what do they do now? After everything they did to me, after everything they took from me, they come to me asking for a loan. They want me to help them save their business. Can you believe that? It's like the universe is playing some sick joke. They thought they could take my idea, ride my coattails to success, and now that they've run it into the ground, they're looking to me for help. It's hard to even wrap my head around it. Part of me wants to help, maybe out of some old feelings for them, maybe because they're family, but another part of me feels like I'd be a fool to do anything for them after everything that's happened. Stick around, because this story is far from over. What happens next? Well, that's where it gets really interesting. Before all of this happened, I had what I thought was a solid family bond, something that couldn't be broken. My brother Greg and I had always been close. We grew up together, sharing everything from toys to dreams. Sure, we had our disagreements like any siblings, but I never thought for a second that he would do something like this to me. And my ex-wife, Sarah? Well, we were married for years. I trusted her with my life. We were partners in everything, not just in marriage, but in everything I did. She was there for the highs, the lows, the moments when I felt like I was on top of the world, and when I felt like everything was falling apart. So when I had this business idea, I shared it with both of them. I thought, they're family, they'll understand, they'll support me. The idea? Well, it wasn't something just anyone could think of. I'd always been a bit of an inventor, someone who saw the world a little differently. This idea had the potential to change everything. It wasn't just some random thing I threw together. No, it was something I had spent months researching, planning, and perfecting. It was based on an existing problem I saw in the market, something that people were constantly struggling with. The concept was simple enough, improve an existing service, but the way I planned to execute it was revolutionary. It was unique, and it was something I knew could make a real impact. I threw myself into it. I put in the hours, worked late nights, skipped weekends. I was obsessed with making it perfect. There were sacrifices, oh so many sacrifices. I gave up time with friends, time with family, time with Sarah. There were nights when I'd fall asleep at my desk, exhausted from trying to get everything just right, but I kept going because I believed in it. I believed in it and in myself. This business was going to be my legacy. I remember the first time I started putting the idea into action. It was so exciting. I got a small loan to help get things off the ground. I hired a couple of people to help with the development, but most of the heavy lifting was on me. I was writing business plans, contacting suppliers, networking with potential investors. It felt like a roller coaster ride. One minute I was flying high, the next I was trying to keep everything from crashing down. During all of this, Sarah and Greg were my sounding boards. I talked to them about everything, every hurdle I faced, every breakthrough. They were the first people I turned to when I had questions or needed advice. I trusted them completely. We sat at the kitchen table many nights, tossing around ideas, discussing the future of the business. Looking back, it's painful to think about how much I relied on them. I thought they had my back. Little did I know, they were just waiting for the right moment to take what was mine. But none of that mattered to me at the time. All I cared about was making this business work, and I was convinced that with enough work and dedication, it would. And in a way, it did. Just not for me. It wasn't long before I started noticing things. Little comments from Greg, a look on Sarah's face when we talked about the business. But by then, it was too late. The idea I had poured my heart into was no longer mine. It had already been taken from me. At first, it was just small things. Nothing that seemed like a big deal. I'd catch Greg asking more questions than usual about the business, what I was working on, who I was talking to, how things were going. At first, I didn't think much of it. Greg had always been curious, especially when it came to things I was passionate about. But then it started to happen more often. He'd pop in when I was working late, asking if I needed help, or just giving me that knowing smile, like he was trying to be supportive. Sarah, too. She'd show up unexpectedly, always with a thoughtful comment or suggestion. Have you thought about marketing it this way? Or maybe you should add this feature. And every time I'd listen, thinking she just wanted to help, but something didn't sit right. The more I thought about it, the more I started to wonder if they were just being too interested. I'd always shared my ideas with them, but this felt different. They weren't just being supportive. They were getting involved. At first, I brushed it off. After all, they were family, right? What harm could it do if they were a little more interested than usual? Then things took a strange turn. I started noticing that both of them seemed to be spending more time together, just the two of them whenever I wasn't around. It wasn't anything obvious, but it was enough to make me feel uneasy. They'd have these long phone calls when I was in the other room, or disappear for hours, only to come back and talk about things I never mentioned to them. Little details about my business plan, ideas that were still in the early stages, that I had only shared with them. It was almost like they were rehearsing something, speaking in codes that I didn't quite understand. But what bothered me the most was how they seemed to be so secretive about it all. They never told me what they were talking about. Even when I asked, I didn't want to believe it at first. The thought that they might be using me, stealing from me, was too painful to even consider. But the signs kept piling up, and I couldn't ignore them anymore. I'll never forget the day I first realized the truth. It was a regular afternoon, and I had just finished a meeting with a potential investor. I was feeling good about the direction the business was going in, despite all the stress. I walked into the living room, ready to share the news with Sarah and Greg, only to freeze in my tracks. There, on my laptop, was my business plan, the one I had worked for months on, the one I had trusted them both with, and it wasn't just open, it was altered. The logo, the design, even the marketing strategy, everything had been changed. But the core idea? It was all there. And that's when it hit me like a ton of bricks. They weren't just helping me, they were copying me. I remember feeling a cold wave of shock wash over me. I couldn't even process it at first. My mind kept replaying everything. The late nights, the suggestions, the strange behavior. It all made sense now. They hadn't been trying to help. They'd been quietly planning behind my back. They'd taken everything I had shared with them and used it to create their own version of my business. I confronted them right there. I demanded answers. At first, they denied it, saying it was just a coincidence, that they were just working on some ideas of their own. But I could see the guilt in their eyes. I could hear it in their voices. They were lying to me, and deep down, they knew I knew the truth. My brother and ex-wife, the people I trusted the most in the world, had stolen everything I had worked so hard for. It was like a punch to the gut. I couldn't even look at them. All the years of trust, all the moments we shared, everything just crumbled in that instant. The anger hit me next, burning like fire. How could they do this? How could they take something so personal, something I'd built from the ground up, and turn it into their own? I felt betrayed in a way I never thought I'd experience. And worse, it wasn't just a business idea they stole. It was the trust I had in them as people. It felt like they had taken a piece of me and used it for their own gain. The worst part? They didn't even seem sorry. They didn't apologize. Instead, they just tried to justify it. Greg said they were just trying to take the idea to the next level. Sarah tried to convince me it was no big deal, that we could still work together. But I couldn't hear any of it. Not anymore. All I could feel was the sting of betrayal, and the overwhelming realization that the people closest to me had taken something irreplaceable. And that was the moment everything changed. The business I had poured my heart into, the dream I had built, was no longer mine. It was theirs now, and they didn't even have the decency to tell me the truth until it was too late. The fallout from everything that happened was like a storm that tore through every part of my life, leaving nothing untouched. Once the truth came out, I couldn't even look at Greg or Sarah without feeling this deep, gnawing anger in my chest. Our relationship had always been built on trust, but now that trust was shattered. I couldn't understand how they could do this to me, how they could betray me so completely. We didn't talk for weeks, and when we did, it was only to exchange cold words or avoid each other entirely. The warmth and connection I had once shared with both of them, it was gone, replaced by a thick, suffocating tension. Every conversation felt forced, like I was speaking to strangers, not the people who I had considered family. What hurt the most was the loneliness that came with it. It's not just losing your business idea, it's losing the people you thought you could count on. Greg had been my brother, my closest friend. Sarah had been my partner in everything, our marriage, our dreams, our plans for the future. And now they were both strangers to me. The realization hit me hard. I was alone. And it wasn't just that they had taken my business idea. It was the fact that they were both capable of betraying me on such a deep level. It made me question everything I thought I knew about them. Had they always been like this? Or had they just been waiting for the right moment to strike? The emotional toll this betrayal took on me was overwhelming. Every day it felt like a weight was pressing down on me, suffocating me. I was frustrated, not just with them, but with myself. How could I have been so blind? How had I let my guard down so completely? I kept replaying everything over and over in my head, trying to figure out where things had gone wrong, but the answers never made sense. And the worst part was that I couldn't just walk away from it all. This wasn't some small betrayal I could just forget. It was personal. It was everything I had worked for, everything I had believed in, ripped away from me by the two people I trusted the most. And of course, there were consequences, personal consequences I couldn't ignore. The fallout didn't just affect my relationship with Greg and Sarah, it affected my entire life. My business, which I had poured every ounce of energy into, started to suffer. I couldn't focus. I was distracted, constantly thinking about what they had done and how much it hurt. I had to spend countless hours fixing things, making sure my idea wasn't entirely taken over, trying to rebuild what I had lost. My mental health took a hit too. The stress was unbearable at times. I'd wake up feeling exhausted, knowing I had to face another day of dealing with the mess they'd created. I found myself questioning whether I could even keep going, whether it was worth it to continue with the business after everything that had happened. The betrayal didn't just affect me professionally, it bled into my personal life as well. Friends who had supported me began to notice the change in me. I wasn't the same person anymore. I became withdrawn, distant, and a lot more cynical. The people I once trusted with my heart and soul had betrayed me, and now I didn't know who I could trust anymore. It was like I was walking through life with this heavy fog around me, unable to see clearly, unable to find a way out of the mess I was in. As for Greg and Sarah, things were never the same. Even when we did talk, there was no fixing what had been broken. We weren't a family anymore. We were just two people who had crossed a line, and there was no going back from that. The more I tried to make sense of it all, the more I realized that some things, some betrayals, couldn't be undone. And that realization hurt more than anything else. I was left to pick up the pieces, trying to rebuild a life that had been shattered, all while carrying the weight of their betrayal on my shoulders. It's hard to say it, but I'll be honest, I wasn't surprised when their business started to crash. After everything that happened, I guess deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time. At first, when they launched their company, they were riding high. It seemed like everything they touched turned to gold. They were getting attention, pulling in customers, and even securing some decent partnerships. From the outside, it looked like they were on top of the world, like they had everything figured out. But I knew better. I knew the truth behind their success. It wasn't their idea. It wasn't their hard work or innovation that got them to where they were. It was my business plan, my vision, my sacrifices. They were riding on my coattails, and deep down, I think they knew that. They didn't have the passion or the grit that I had put into the business. They didn't understand what it took to make it work. They had stolen an idea, but they didn't have the foundation to build anything lasting. And sure enough, cracks started to appear. It began slowly at first. Orders were delayed, customers weren't as satisfied, and their social media buzz started to fade. They didn't have the same drive that I had, the hunger to keep pushing forward when things got tough. And when things got tough, like they always do in business, their true lack of experience showed. They made mistakes, big ones. The marketing strategy wasn't sustainable. The product wasn't as great as they had promised, and the worst part? They didn't know how to fix it. They were scrambling, trying to play catch-up while pretending everything was still fine. I heard the rumors. Friends who were still in touch with them started telling me how desperate they were getting. They were making excuses, blaming everyone but themselves for the cracks in their company. They had no real plan B, no backup strategy. Their business wasn't built on something solid. It was built on a lie. And lies have a way of falling apart eventually. What's even worse is that I could see it coming from a mile away. They had stolen my idea, but they didn't have the tools to make it succeed. They didn't have the passion I had, the long nights, the sacrifices. They thought they could simply take what I had built and make it their own. But business doesn't work like that. It's not just about the idea, it's about execution. And they didn't have it. Now, their business is sinking fast. They've lost most of their customers, and their cash flow is drying up. I heard they've had to lay off staff, and their investors are getting nervous. People who once believed in them are pulling out. And through all of this, I can almost hear the desperation in their voices whenever I see them. They're stuck in this sinking ship, and they don't know how to get out. They're running out of options. And now, of course, they're reaching out to me, asking for a loan, asking for help. Can you imagine that? After everything they did to me, after stealing what was mine, they think they can come crawling back, expecting me to throw them a lifeline? The gall. They didn't even offer an apology, not a single ounce of remorse. Instead, it's as if nothing ever happened. They want me to bail them out of the mess they created, and the whole thing feels like a slap in the face. It's almost as if they think the damage they caused can be undone with some money. Like everything that went down between us can be forgotten with a check. But that's not how it works. They had their chance, and they blew it. They thought they could take what was mine and build something better. But now they're facing the consequences of their actions. The worst part is knowing that they're in financial ruin because they never understood what it takes to make a business successful. They thought they could just take my idea, slap a new label on it, and call it their own. But business isn't like that. And now they're facing the consequences of their greed and arrogance, and I can't help but feel a strange sense of satisfaction. After all, they stole from me, thinking they could get away with it. And now they're paying the price. I never thought this day would come, not in a million years. But there they were, Sarah and Greg, standing in front of me, looking like nothing had changed. The same faces, the same voices, but now they had a new, incredibly bold request. A request that I could never have anticipated, not after everything that happened. They wanted me to give them a loan to save their failing company. Can you believe that? At first I thought I'd heard them wrong. Maybe the stress was getting to me, or I was just so caught off guard by the suddenness of it all. But no, they were serious. Sarah, with her pleading eyes, and Greg, who seemed unusually calm despite the mess they'd created, stood there, almost as if they were expecting me to just hand over the money without question. They said they had no other options left. Their business was sinking, and without a loan, they wouldn't be able to recover. They needed me, they said. What was even more maddening was how they tried to downplay everything that had happened. Like the betrayal, the stolen idea, and the way they had wrecked our relationship never happened. Sarah was the first to speak, trying to soften me up with those fake words of remorse. I know things haven't been great between us, but we really need your help. We've made mistakes, but we can fix it, she said. Her voice was all sugary, like she was trying to convince herself just as much as she was trying to convince me. And then there was Greg. He wasn't as emotional, but he wasn't far behind. Look, man, he started, his tone almost casual, as if asking for money wasn't the most ridiculous thing they could have done. We thought we could make it work on our own, but we're in deep now. We never meant for things to go like this. But we need you. You're the only one who can help us get back on track. As they spoke, I could feel my blood boiling. The audacity of it. The gall. How could they stand there, acting like nothing happened? Like they hadn't torn everything apart, and now expected me to swoop in and save them? Didn't they realize how much they had hurt me? How could they ask for help after everything they did? The very idea of it felt like another betrayal, another reminder of how selfish and entitled they had become. I stood there, stunned, listening to their words, but inside my mind, I was screaming. Part of me wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all. The other part of me felt the familiar surge of anger that I had tried to bury for so long. The memories of their betrayal flooded back, the trust they shattered, the idea they took, The way they turned my dream into their own, all for the sake of profit. And now, they wanted me to give them more? To help them when they hadn't shown an ounce of remorse? It wasn't just the loan they were asking for. It was my forgiveness. They wanted me to let go of everything they had done, to forget how they had stolen from me, and to pretend we could go back to the way things were. But the worst part? They weren't even acknowledging the hurt. They weren't owning up to the damage they'd caused. They were just assuming I'd swoop in like some knight in shining armor, ready to save the day. I could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on me. A part of me was conflicted. Maybe they did deserve a second chance. Maybe they were desperate. But then again, there was no part of me that could just forget what they had done. My mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. Should I help them? Should I forgive them and put the past behind me? Or should I stand my ground, hold firm to the fact that they crossed a line that couldn't be undone? Every fiber of my being screamed that I should say no, that I should remind them of how they had betrayed me. But as they stood there, staring at me with those wide, desperate eyes, I could feel the weight of their plea. Maybe they weren't entirely wrong. They were in a bad place, and they were asking for help. But did that mean I had to give it to them? Did I owe them this kindness after everything? The internal conflict was tearing me apart. On one hand, I was angry, hurt, and tired of being taken advantage of. On the other hand, I couldn't ignore the fact that they were family. They were still my brother and ex-wife, even if they didn't feel like it anymore. Could I help them? Could I really just turn my back on them and watch them fall, knowing I had the power to help? But as I stood there, staring at them, I knew the answer wasn't clear-cut. It wasn't just about money. It was about trust, about boundaries, and about whether or not I could ever forgive them for what they had done. And no matter how much I tried to justify it, part of me knew that forgiving them wasn't going to be easy, and helping them wasn't something I was ready to do. Not yet. Not after everything. As I sat there, listening to their words echoing in my mind, I could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on me. I couldn't think straight. Part of me wanted to scream, to throw them out of my house and tell them they were on their own. After all, that's what they deserved, right? They had betrayed me, taken something so personal from me, and now they were asking for my help like nothing ever happened. How could I just forgive them and pretend it was all okay? But then again, there was a part of me, deep down, that remembered the good times. The way things used to be before everything fell apart. I remembered how Sarah and I used to talk for hours about our dreams, how Greg and I had been inseparable as kids, always having each other's backs. We had been a family. Despite everything that had happened, those old feelings still lingered. I could feel them, pulling me back into a place where I wanted to believe they were capable of change, that maybe, just maybe, they regretted what they had done. The question kept spinning in my mind. Was this my chance to heal things, to fix what had been broken? If I helped them, maybe it would all go back to the way it was before. Maybe this would be the turning point where we could rebuild our relationship. They needed me, and despite everything, part of me still wanted to be there for them. Maybe I could forgive them, help them out of their mess, and we could move on. Maybe this loan could fix everything. Maybe it could repair the hurt and the betrayal. But there was another part of me that could not, for the life of me, ignore the betrayal. The way they had stolen my idea without a second thought, as if I didn't matter. The way they had let greed blind them to what really mattered. Family, loyalty, trust. How could I ever forget that? How could I ever just sweep it under the rug and pretend it didn't sting anymore? That feeling of being taken advantage of being used and discarded, was still fresh. It was still raw, and I could feel it all over again. If I helped them, what would that say about me? Was I really just a pushover, someone willing to forgive everything for the sake of peace? Or would they see it as me giving in, me admitting that they had the power over me, that they could break me and then ask for my help when things got hard? If I said yes, would it really fix things? Or would it just create more resentment, more hurt? What if they never learned their lesson? What if they just kept taking and taking, never thinking about the consequences? But then again, what if this was the only way to put an end to the anger, to move forward and let go of the past? Maybe this loan could be my way of finally closing that chapter, of proving that I wasn't going to let their betrayal define me. Maybe it was time to show them I wasn't the bitter, angry person they thought I was. But could I really do that? Could I really put myself in a position to forgive them and help them, knowing everything they had done? The more I thought about it, the more torn I became. I weighed the pros and cons in my head, playing out every scenario. If I helped them, I might finally find some peace. But at what cost? If I said no, they might go under, and I'd be the one to blame for not saving them. But would I be okay with that? Could I live with the guilt of letting them fail, knowing I had the power to stop it? After what felt like an eternity, I knew I couldn't make this decision alone. But in the end, the answer became clear. Despite everything, I couldn't give them that loan. The betrayal was too much. They had crossed a line, and I couldn't just forget that. Helping them wouldn't fix things. It would just make the wounds deeper. They needed to learn that actions have consequences. And I needed to learn that sometimes saying no is the hardest but the right thing to do. So I told them I couldn't help, that I wasn't going to give them the loan. I saw the shock on their faces, the disbelief, the hurt. They tried to convince me, tried to guilt-trip me, but I stood firm. I didn't want to be the person who kept enabling their mistakes. I had to let go, even if it hurt. Walking away from that moment wasn't easy, but deep down I knew I had made the right choice. The aftermath of my decision to refuse helping them hit me harder than I expected. In the hours that followed, I felt a mix of relief and regret. It wasn't an easy choice to make, and I didn't know if I'd done the right thing. But as the days passed, I realized I had to face the truth. There was no going back. Refusing them meant breaking some that could never be mended the same way again. My ex-wife and brother didn't take it well. The silence that followed was deafening. They didn't understand why I couldn't just let the past go. I could see the disappointment in their eyes, the hurt, and the anger bubbling just beneath the surface. They tried to push me, tried to make me feel guilty, but I stayed firm. I had to. I couldn't keep sacrificing my peace, my trust, just to make them comfortable. And honestly, deep down, I knew they hadn't learned a thing. Months passed, and nothing really changed. They didn't suddenly turn their lives around, and their company? It failed, just as I had predicted. It crumbled under the weight of their mistakes. They didn't have the vision, the dedication, or the drive to make it work, especially when it wasn't their idea to begin with. But the worst part? They never truly took responsibility for what they'd done. Instead of learning from their failures, they blamed everyone but themselves. They blamed me, they blamed the market, they blamed bad luck, but never did they own up to their actions. They didn't learn from the past, they just repeated it. As for me, it was hard not to feel that ache, that sense of loss, especially with my brother. There was a time when he was my best friend, my partner in everything. But now, things were different. That bond, that trust, had been shattered beyond repair. My ex-wife, too, remained distant. She tried to reach out a few times, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. How could I? The love we once shared felt like a distant memory, clouded by betrayal. The consequences of my decision were far-reaching. It didn't fix everything, but what it did give me was a sense of clarity. I didn't need them to validate my worth. I didn't need to keep trying to fix something that was broken beyond repair. The betrayal was a harsh lesson, but it was one I had to learn in order to move forward. Now I'm at peace. I've moved on. I don't carry the burden of that betrayal anymore. I've rebuilt my business, my trust in myself, and my confidence. As for them, I'm not sure what their future holds, but I know that I've done what I could. And in the end, that's all anyone can really do. Looking back on everything that happened, I've learned more than I ever expected. The whole situation with my ex-wife and brother has changed me in ways I didn't think possible. For one, I've learned how fragile trust really is. It's like glass. It can look perfect on the outside, but once it's shattered, it's almost impossible to put back together in the same way. And trust, especially in relationships and business, is everything. Without it, you're building on sand. It's a lesson that hurt deeply, but it's also a lesson I'm better for having learned. In business, I always thought that hard work and dedication were enough to get ahead. But I've come to realize it's not just about the work. It's about who you trust along the way. I built my ideas with passion, with dreams, and they were taken. That kind of betrayal cuts deep, and it makes you second-guess who you let close to you. But through it all, I've come to understand that trust isn't something to be given freely. It's earned over time, through honesty and respect. I guess that's the thing about situations like this. They make you question your choices, your judgment, and your instincts. But what I've learned is that it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to stumble as long as you pick yourself up and keep moving forward. Now I'm curious, if you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Would you have helped them, despite everything? Or would you have walked away, like I did? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have any of you been through something like this? Drop a comment and share your experience. Maybe we can all learn a little bit more from each other. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you want more stories like this. Thanks for listening to mine.